Okay, I'm going to look at a very interesting verse of Scripture we don't really hear from too often. I'm reading from 2 Samuel, and this is going to be chapter 16, verses 5 through 14. So I'll give you all some time to read that. Very interesting concept here. David is the king right now of Israel. Israel is about to have a civil war because his son Absalom has gotten a little too big for his britches, and he wants to kill his own dad and seize the throne. He's even going to be immoral with his dad's concubines to try to establish himself. One of the most nasty betrayals you can think of. David still loves his son very much, does not want him dead, but the fact of the matter is it's either his life or David's. And there's a cause to be made here. Absalom's trying to take what was not rightfully his. David refused to kill King Saul, even though Saul was trying to kill him because Saul was God's anointed, and David did not want to usurp God's authority by ending Saul's reign prematurely, and he had faith that God would protect him. David's own son isn't even doing that with his dad. He was never anointed king, he just got too big for his britches, and David really does not want to kill him. But nevertheless, there's some war going on. Another piece to the background is David had to have 7 descendants of King Saul handed over to the Gibeonites because there was a famine in Israel. And David said, God, what's going on? Why is there a famine? And God said, King Saul committed a horrible act against the Gibeonites. Gibeonites were a tribe that was living in the land when Israel came in. They were one of those tribes that God said, drive them out. But the Gibeonites saw what was coming, and they did a little act of trickery. Dressed up in old, torn clothes, and approached Joshua and said, we're foreigners from a faraway land, and we'd like to make peace with you and have an alliance. Without asking God, Joshua agreed to strike peace with the Gibeonites. So through trickery, they got to stay living in Israel. And King Saul, God said, all right, you made a promise with him, keep it. Let him live in peace. King Saul attempted genocide against the Gibeonites. Killed many of them, but not all of them. And God says justice needs served. So David asked the Gibeonites, what would you like done to make this right? So they said, hand us over at least 7 of Saul's descendants. David honors their request, but doesn't hand over his son Mephibosheth, who was descended from Jonathan, who was David's best friend. 7 of his descendants are hanged. It's believed that that is the background of this story. So David is in a lot of turmoil. He doesn't want his son killed, or any of his people killed who are joining him. Sure, agreed him to kill the descendants of Saul. But what happened had to happen. Because David's in all this turmoil, he's in a state of questioning. And while that's going on, this happens. So chapter 16, starting with verse 5. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name is Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. He threw stones at David and all the servants to the king and all the people and all the mighty men who were at his right hand and at his left. Thus Shimei said when he cursed, get out, you man of bloodshed and worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. Behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head. But the king said, what have I to do with you, O son of Zeruiah? For if he curses, and if the Lord has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so? Then David said to Abishai and all his servants, behold, my son who came out for me seeks my life. How much more now this Benjaminite? Let him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of his cursing this day. So David and his men went on their way. And Shimei went along on the hillside parallel with them, And as he went, he cursed and cast stones and threw dust at him. The king and all the people who were with him arrived, weary, and he refreshed himself there. Physically tired and no doubt emotionally tired and annoyed from listening to this crazy guy cursing at them and throwing rocks at them. How often do people throw curses and rocks at kings and live to tell about it? It doesn't happen often. So what are we seeing here with David? He's in a state of great turmoil. David has a realization that he committed a big sin a while back with Bathsheba, the wife of one of his generals, Uriah the Hittite. Sees her bathing, gets a little excited, a little lustful, has an affair with her. She's pregnant with his kid, so he has Uriah the Hittite killed. Prophet Nathan comes to him, gives him a word picture to demonstrate what happened, and says, "You were a dirtbag. Because of what you did, the first son that you have with Bathsheba is going to die, and violence is never going to depart from your house." It's a prophet of the Lord. So David realized he had a curse there. So he thought, well, maybe this is part of it. The curse given by Shimei is, your son Absalom's going to take your throne from you, and you're getting what you deserve. David's like, could be right. David was an open-minded man. David knew he was cursed because of his sin. And David, in his state of grief, made him question whether he was in God's will with what he was doing. Sometimes people who know full well God exists, when they go through crisis, will start questioning and having doubts, is God real? Does he really care about me? David isn't going through that kind of questioning, but people go through more than that. He was questioning whether he did the right thing because of all the bloodshed that happened and the grief he was experiencing. I don't have any of my own children, but I've got two little sisters, and I've had to watch children for Children's Church. Sometimes you got to make rules, got to put kids in timeout when they do certain things. And you see how sad they are and how grieved they are, and you start wondering, is that really the right thing to do? Your better judgment says, don't let that kid do that, they can get hurt. But your heart just weeps seeing that kid crying and sad. But you know, that's part of growing up. Kids need to learn that sometimes the answer is no. They need to learn that when you don't obey, it brings pain. But it nevertheless brings pain to the heart of the parent or the caregiver. So, Absalom had to be stopped. God did not anoint him as king. He anointed David as king. David did not pick Absalom to replace him. So Absalom was trying to steal what wasn't rightfully his, and he had to be stopped. And it was all no holds barred. But David emotionally, because he loves his son and his people, is questioning. And although he heard God's voice to talk to the Gibeonites, he wants to question that. David didn't want to see Saul's family killed. I guarantee it. Jonathan, Saul's son, was his best friend. That's why he spared his son, Mephibosheth. Now, having said that, what do you think might have potentially happened if these male descendants of Saul aren't killed? Saul was the last king of Israel. And David makes this point. He says, my own son's trying to kill me. So why should I be surprised that this descendant of Saul, this Benjaminite, wants to kill me? Evidently, God saw what was going to happen. And the Bible says something interesting. Here's what's very profound about David. He's open to the possibility that this guy showing him disrespect might be speaking for God. In the book of Proverbs, it says that an undeserved curse is like a bird that keeps flying, meaning it doesn't stick. And the inverse of that is if a curse is deserved, it might very well stick. I mentioned a while back that my dad and I are into the show Wicked Tuna. They were showing some old rerun episodes. This one they showed has this one captain who has a reputation of being mentally unstable and a jerk, who decides to play a very unnice prank on one of the other captains. One of the other captains found this nice, secluded place where nobody wants to bother him. He's able to fish at peace with his family, and and catch tuna there with nobody bothering him. And he radios these other captains of the fleet, hey, Dave is catching a whole lot of tuna where he's at these coordinates. So while he's having a nice secluded place, this other captain, minding his own business, has these other ships crowding in on him, interfering with his fishing. So this other captain, who was the victim of that act of nastiness, decides to get him back. So what he does is he sneaks up on his boat and hides bananas in various places in the boat. There's this old wives' tale that bananas on a boat brings bad luck. So this is his way of putting a curse on him. So as I'm watching this, I'm thinking, come on, Dave, is that the best you got? I mean, if I'm going to get someone back for something, think of maybe sabotaging his motor, chaining up his propeller or something, maybe skunk oil, but bananas, that's the best you could do? That's all he does. So then Paul, the guy who initially started the prank, goes out, and his motor dies. And then they got to get the generator fired up. They're all confused at what's going on. And then his mate discovers, hey, we get bananas here. So someone watches this and thinking, come on, that can't be real. Either that was staged or that was coincidence. I mean, come on, did bananas really bring that curse? And then a thought occurred to me, wasn't the bananas. The Bible says whatever a man sows, he reaps. And an undeserved curse keeps flying. It's entirely possible that God looked down from heaven and said, Paul, you were a jerk. So Dave wants to curse you with bananas. I'm going to honor that. It's very possible. So David's open to the possibility that maybe he did wrong, maybe he deserves a curse. But David was open-minded, partly because he was also a man of mercy. The title of the sermon is The Heart of a Godly Man in Turmoil. So the first thing that comes out of him is he's open-minded to the fact that God could be giving him a legitimate message of a punishment he deserves. But the second thing you see is David's a man of mercy. Most kings would have dealt with this guy, Shimei. He's not just disrespecting him with his mouth, he's throwing rocks at him and his men. If a rock hits somebody in the wrong place, it can do some real damage. Yeah, David has every right to say, yeah, take off his head, or at the very least say, you want to curse with your mouth? That's fine. You throw one more rock, it's going to represent your head. David doesn't even do that. He tolerates disrespect and rocks and has mercy on this guy, who might be wrong, but might be right. Battle of Cold Harbor in the Civil War. I've maybe given this example in the past. There was a Union regiment charging. They got decimated at this battle. This one regiment had a flag bearer that just kept going and didn't realize that his regiment around him had been wiped out. So all by himself, oblivious to his comrades being dead, he's carrying this flag, charging at the Confederate base with nothing but a flag with these guys out-arming with guns. Legally, he's a combatant. Legally, the Confederates had every right to fill this guy full of lead. But they all decided to shout at him, go back, go back, go back. He's seeing these Confederates and he's confused, wondering what's going on. And then he looks around and realizes that he's the last man standing of his regiment, and they're yelling at him, go back, go back. Puts his flag down, gives him a salute, does an about face, and goes back. They showed mercy on him when they had every right to kill him. And we like stories like that. I mean, what did Jesus say? Be merciful as your Father is merciful. Perhaps part of the reason David's referred to as a man after God's own heart. David wanted mercy on others, partly because he wanted God's mercy. Let's take one more look at verse 12. What does David say? Perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good on me instead of his cursing this day. Maybe my act of kindness of not killing this guy when I got every right to might mean that God will have mercy on me. A while back at church, saw someone make a mistake. Made me mad. There were people around who were oblivious to it, the problem that it was causing. So I jumped in and fixed it. I was mad. But of course, I didn't want to spoil things at church, so keeping my mouth shut, but I'm just mad in my head. And God's like, Billy, you have made that mistake before yourself. You have been oblivious to other people's mistakes instead of fixing them when you could have. If you want to have mercy, extend it to others. Of course, right after that happens, I make a mistake working with someone else that was stupid. Could have done some damage. At that moment, I did need some mercy because I was dumb. And then as God reminded me and I repeated, you want mercy, you got to give it. David understands that. And by the way, what if David orders the death of Shimei? What is Shimei saying about David? You're a man of bloodshed. Hasn't David just proven his point? If he goes and orders the guy to put him to death over throwing rocks, hasn't David just proven Shimei's point? So David has an opportunity to disprove him. You're calling me a man of bloodshed? I just restrained one of my soldiers from killing you, and you're throwing rocks at us and cursing me. David did not want to kill Absalom or his followers, because they're all his people, and Absalom's his son. Fortunately, Absalom did have to die, and David was very grieved by it. David had mercy on King Saul. Not just his family. David had multiple opportunities where Saul was chasing him to try to kill him, and David refused to kill him because he's the Lord's anointed. David was also the Lord's anointed, but God had a time for when Saul's reign would end and David's would begin. And that brings us to point number 3. David was merciful because he feared the Lord. He realized, you sow mercy, you reap it. He realized that killing Saul would have challenged God's authority. Yeah, David has some faith here. Saul's trying to kill him. Shouldn't I kill him to save my own life? No. If God's anointed you king, he's going to make you king in the right time, which means he's going to protect you from Saul. And at the same time, if you kill Saul, you've just overstepped into God's authority by ending Saul's reign before the time was right. Oh, and what message does David give people? He kills the king whose throne he ends up taking. What message does that give people? It's okay to use violence to take what's yours. And guess what eventually happens to David if he does that?
Same thing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the same thing was being attempted anyhow, but David did not set that precedent. He feared God, which is why he had mercy on Saul. He had mercy on the prophet Nathan. Nathan brings a word picture saying, 2 men are in your kingdom. One of them is a very rich man who has a bunch of sheep. The other is a very poor man who only owns 1 sheep. One day there was a supper at the house of the rich man. So he needed to have lamb meat for his guests. So what do you think he does? He takes the lamb of the poor man. David gets furious and says, I want this guy in my dungeon forever. Who is he? And Nathan says, this man's you. You're the king, you got a bunch of wives. Your good friend Uriah the Hittite only had 1. Instead of being happy with what God gave you, you stole another man's wife and had him killed. And because of what you did, the sword's not going to depart from your house. This guy's speaking to the king. David does not have Nathan punished. He says, you're right. I did something wrong and you pointed it out to me. You see, if God had punished Nathan, he hasn't just punished Nathan. He struck out at God. God gave Nathan that message. God said, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery. So by punishing Nathan with a death sentence or something else, he's just taking a smack at God. Oh, and he's also set a precedent of, I don't want to hear truth if it's too harsh. A good king wants truth, even if it hurts, so he can make a better decision. There was another prophet who wasn't so lucky. Jeremiah, during the reign of King Zedekiah. Babylonians are surrounding Jerusalem. Jeremiah tells the king, you need to surrender. Your people have defected to Babylon, some of them. And God's saying that the time is up. If you surrender, there's going to be no bloodshed. The temple's still going to be intact. Everything's going to be nice and ordered. If you don't, it's not going to be good. Zedekiah was furious at that. And has Jeremiah thrown in a well where he didn't get much food. What happened to Zedekiah? Didn't take Jeremiah's advice. Nebuchadnezzar came. He says, this is the last thing you're going to see. Here are all your sons. Puts them to death right in front of them, and then gouges his eyes out, taking him back to Babylon. He struck out at God's servant, struck out at God's message, rejected his truth, and paid for it. David doesn't do that. And he doesn't even do it with this annoying fool Shimei. David is open to the possibility that maybe Shimei was speaking God's truth. He wasn't. Absalom didn't win. This guy was just mad. But David was open to the possibility that maybe God had a message for him. And because he feared God and was merciful as a result and open-minded as a result, he spared Shimei's life while he's throwing rocks and cursing him. Do we ever challenge God's authority in our lives? Has God ever told you some harsh truth that you didn't handle well and you lashed out on the person who told you? Have you ever done little acts of malice to try to get your way when it wasn't the timing that God had for you? Ugh. Fred got the promotion I wanted. What can I do to take it? Ugh. Do you ever have jealousy? Do you ever have fear that you've got to take matters into your own hands when God says, wait, there's a certain order process for this, and you're not the judge, jury, and executioner here? David understood something. Yeah, he messed up once with Uriah the Hittite and Bathsheba. But at some point along the way, he got the idea that there's a God. He has a timing. He has a message. He feared the Lord. And what does it say over and over again if you read the book of Proverbs? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if I could tell you this sermon in one sentence, I would say this. David showed the fear of the Lord by being open-minded and merciful to people God raised up, or he thought might have been raised up by God. If you're in God's will, be open-minded and merciful to others. If a curse is undeserved, it will pass. And if it sticks, you need to take it as a sign that maybe you need to change something. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so much for giving us an example with King David. I ask that you would help us to fear you and to show it by being open-minded to your voice, even if it goes against what we want, even if it comes from harsh truth from people that we don't want to hear. And help us to be merciful as you're merciful, not to lash out on people who give us harsh truth or maybe wrong. Help us to hear your voice in fear, in the form of respect. Lord, I ask that you would be with everybody here today. Keep them safe as they go home, and please keep us safe as we play softball today. And let any injury that happens be a teaching experience that can be recovered from. And Lord, I ask that you would help us to be a good witness for you in this league. I ask all these things in your Son's name, amen. Go in peace.